Hey, everyone. If you're hanging out in the chat, let me know by sending a message. This is supposed to be an office hours for the Hashnode Hackathon with Planetscale. So hopefully we have some people join and ask some questions. And if not, I'm just going to work on something. Josh, what's going on? Thanks for coming back. First time chat from Homie Coder. Oh, snap. That's Jay Quick. Homie Coder, have we interacted before? If we have, let me know where and when. Then we have another chat from De Niro, first time on the channel as well. Welcome. Thanks y'all for being here. Just out of curiosity, are any of you all participating in the hackathon? Or are you just joining the stream to hang out? And if you are doing the hackathon, what are you building? And are there any questions that you have about what you're building? No, but I watch your videos now. I feel like a creeper. Homie Coder, that's all good. No worries. If you have I don't know if you follow me on Twitter or not, Coder, but if you do, send me a message and then I'll follow you back if I'm not already. Zamthor just hanging out. Appreciate it. Josh, got my remix app deployed with Netlify, Prisma, and Planetscale for the hackathon. Cool. Hey, Josh, I'm going to do I have a feeling there's going to be a good amount of downtime. I kind of doubt there'll be a ton of questions, especially with this first session. Josh, is there any chance that you want to join this stream with me and just talk about what you built and what the process was like with all of the above remix, Netlify, Prisma, Planetscale, and share that with everyone? If you do, let me know and I'll just send you a link so you can join. Homie Coder, cool. Now we've met. Yes. Uh, now we're officially friends. It only takes one message. Cool. Josh, sounds like you're good to go. I'm gonna send you a link, Josh, and I'm gonna get you to come hang out with me as soon as I figure out where that link is. There it is. And then go into my DMs on Twitter. And I'm going to send you a link. So feel free. That's not the right link. I sent you the wrong thing. That is not it. Also, where did that even come from? Where did I get that link from? Might guess. Copy. I don't know how that just happened. Somehow I just sent you a link to my Twitch channel. Anyway, Josh, you got a link in your DMs. If you are willing to join, then please do. What's up, Kevin? How's it going? Kevin, are you doing anything hackathon wise? Are you building anything for this hackathon? Are you participating? Looking forward to seeing Josh come on and join. In a couple of minutes. I've got my Kevin. Yeah, great question. Or I guess that's good clarification. So let's actually pull this up. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. How do we do this? With not that, but this. And you can see my very bare bones remix app that I'm working on. And let's go to Hashnode Planetscale Hackathon. And I will bring up the details. Ish, what's going on? Welcome. And Niall is here. I'm chat from Niall. What's going on? And Josh just joined as well. So let me bring him on. This is risky because Josh, you're just going to go live to everyone. So you're live.
Hey guys.
What's up? I was just someone asked about the hackathon. They weren't. I guess Kevin didn't know there was a hackathon, so I'll send a link to this. But this is the Hashnode has done hackathons every month for the past about a year or so. I think they've been doing them for a year with some cool companies: Vercel, Netlify, Auth0 when I was there. Really cool ones. So there's 20 grand in prizes for the teams if people participate and win. So I'm just doing like office hours. So if people have questions about Planetscale, or if you have questions that I may be able to answer in other technologies, feel free to ask. In the meantime, I'm going to go back to hide this. And then, Josh, if you want, you could just kind of tell us like what you're building, what the stack is, and how it's been so far.
Yeah, so last night I spent a lot of time on it. We could go into it a little bit today, but this idea of like these remix stacks, it's kind of hard to pick like which one's the right one. And at this point, I don't have one that lines up with everything that I want, and so I'm sort of having to take pieces of different people's repos and sort of squish them all together into the solution that I want. So that's been fun to explore. But
What
yeah, I can
were
go. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
this will probably get into what you're going to say. What were some of the specific features maybe that you didn't find lumped together that you are now building out yourself in the remix stack?
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. So there's a K-pop stack from Netlify, and so the Netlify team made their own they made their own remix stack. For those that don't know, basically the remix team, remix is like a front end framework that just came out. It became stable like 6 months ago, I think, and so they announced this idea of stacks, and it's like a pre-built full stack environment for you to get started, right? Kind of like Create React App. And so the K-pop stack's made by the Netlify team, but it uses Supabase, which is this like self-hosted service that
Hmm.
works with authentication and storage and a few other things. And I just really wasn't interested in using Supabase. And then the most popular one right now, or which one that I seem to align with the most, is the Indie Stack, which Kent C. Dodds built, and it's I think it's a fly.io deployment, so it's sort of this Dockerized Express app version of Remix that's deployed, and I don't want to do that either. And so I decided I want to do Netlify and I want to do Planetscale and I want to do Remix. And so how do all these things come together? And so what I'm seeing, and what some of you may find the same frustration, James, as you learn Remix, is it's a new framework. So there's not going to be thousands of Google results when you search for something. And so sort of up to us. And I do have a YouTube channel, so I'm hoping to share more of this knowledge, so that when people Google these things, some reasonable answers come up. But yeah, I think the main piece of it is, at least the Netlify's part, they are serving Remix apps on the edge using serverless functions. And so you have to set up the server and you have to set up the client, all to work with the deploy process that Netlify has. And so I do have that working. I'm welcome to, I can show that off, or I could just show off kind of my hackathon idea. And of course, it's open source, so everyone's going to be able to see it.
Yeah. Do you want to start to share your screen? And then while you're doing that, I've got a question in the chat from Anaketh. Can we use Planetscale in a Web3 project? And so Planetscale is just a database. So anywhere that you could or would use a database in a W3 project, you could use Planetscale instead of another database. So Anakath, I guess the first question is, do you have a database that you're already using? And if so, what is it? And then we can maybe talk about some of the potential trade-offs or benefits or whatever for using Planetscale specifically for this hackathon. A teammate, Brian Morrison, just actually joined the team at Planetscale, who's been a friend of mine for a while, and he just did a quick, just to kind of check out Planetscale for the first time, did a quick port of DynamoDB and Amazon to Planetscale, and was able to move all that stuff over pretty quickly. So yeah, short answer is Planetscale is just a database. It's based on MySQL. So anywhere that you need to store data, you could use Planetscale for that inside of your W3 project. Josh, I see your screen is up. Are you good for me to pull that on now?
Sure.
Sweet.
For those that don't know, I'm a Vim guy. For those that are going to ask, what are you doing? How did you do all this? Yeah. So I guess the main thing to talk about is it's a remix app, and so I do need Netlify set up. And so the way that works is there's this server file that has all this sort of Netlify magic, and it can be pulled from their K-pop stack. And then the next piece of it is where is it? This
By the way, we've got
Netlify TOML.
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
A follow-up question to what we just said about Web3. That the blockchain, and this is, by the way, this is not something I have experience with. So referencing the blockchain data stored in the blockchain itself, and I'm using Alchemy for the API calls, but I don't know exactly how to use Planetscale in a Web3 project.
I could talk
So-
into that. I
yeah,
have
go for
Web3
it.
experience. So
Oh, cool. Yeah, perfect.
So the blockchain, the blockchain technology, all it really is a immutable, like, order of just information, right? Information that's just being stored in just a kind of a different technology. So Web3 is not a traditional SQL database like Planetscale is. It's sort of its own version of its own thing. And so when we say Web3, we're typically talking about like an immutable blockchain. And typically you're going to be hosting it through something like Ethereum or a similar sort of network. And in the past, what I've done in the projects I've worked on is we've hosted our own private sidechain, would be the right term. So a sidechain would just be the blockchain technology running on our own servers. So maybe not truly distributed, but still leveraging the same technology. And so you end up with this very specific type of technology that may not have the same CRUD interface that you're used to. And so what you can do if you want to is you could bring a tool like Planetscale in and let it act as a buffer of the information that your actual application wants to run and load and see. And then you may perhaps have, like, when you update or when you maybe you insert something into the Planetscale database, you could have a blockchain event run and actually store and set it in whatever blockchain it is you have set up in your project. And so that becomes, you're sort of balancing two pieces of information, but I think it offers a benefit of a more traditional and simpler sort of API that you build on if you're building a web app. And so the blockchain will always have some sort of unique signature, and so that could, of course, live as maybe a foreign key in your Planetscale database. But I've noticed personally in working with Web3 that when you want to query all of your NFTs on a certain project on a certain blockchain, like, those contracts are expensive, and oftentimes those contracts are not immediate. And so your performance on your actual application isn't going to necessarily look very good. And so you want some sort of way to cache the response, and Planetscale could be a way to do that. You could use Redis, you could just use a traditional caching mechanism if you wanted to. But I think for the sake of like a hackathon, it would be cool to have this sort of serverless SQL database living side by side with whatever sidechain or blockchain or whatever sort of blockchain technology that you're wanting to attach to for whatever it is you're doing. But give us more context, whoever's asking these questions. Like, are you trying to generate NFTs? Are you going to do it on a side chain? We may lose people because I know not everyone loves Web3, so feel free to ask other questions. But I think that's what's cool about hackathons, is it's so open-ended. It's like, build whatever you want. Build Web3. I'll show you guys what I'm building. So
I'm gonna come back to.
let's see.
You've got a question, by the way, that just came in from Home Encoder for you. Sounds like you've been sampling different stacks, which is cool. Curious if there's any part of your stack you would swap out if you started from scratch. So remind us one more time what the stack is that you're working on right now, and then you can answer the question of, is there anything else that you may change if you were to start it from scratch?
Yeah, great question. So last night I got to start from scratch. So this is my current version of this product. And I think, James, you could share more about this as well with your experience. But I think beginners think, I need to learn one stack, and that stack needs to be perfect, and that needs to give me everything that I need for every project I could ever think of. And really the way of thinking about it is pretty much every time you start a new project, you're going to have different that project. And so your tech stack should fit the requirements of the project, not just be the perfect end-all solution for you. And so like my personal website is on Next.js, and I statically generate pages and deploy through Vercel. And so that's great for a blog. The project I'm trying to build now is, let's see, my window.
Also, so short question. You do everything in Vim, is that right? So like no VS Code for you?
Oh no, I don't like opening VS Code if I don't have to.
Oh, that's
So this
amazing.
is my very simple idea. All the things tracker. And so my idea is I want to track different areas of my life, but I want to have some sort of centralized UI, like a life dashboard, so to speak. And all the things is just sort of the play on the meme, as you can see in the top corner. And so like these are my initial ideas, like tracking chores, like when did I last vacuum, when did I last deep clean the freezer, like with my pet, when did I last fill her prescription for the medicine she takes,
I just picked up
cars, when was my
prescriptions
last
today.
oil change,
Yeah.
and then I've been playing around with personal film library is a product I built. So this is like a movie app, and so
Yeah.
this is fun. I like building it. I'm gonna have new features coming soon, but I thought like just generally, I just in all the things tracker, just be like, today I watched this movie, or today I watched these episodes of this show, and so then I can end up with this sort of life dashboard of all these things that I find interesting or just want to keep track of. And because it's open source, and what I'm planning on doing through this project this month is one, this is my hackathon project, and two, I want to make it open source and extendable so that if you have your cool idea of the thing that you want to track in your life that I didn't think of yet, perhaps I can create a clear contribution guide, and you could fork the project and you can add your own thing and make a pull request on the project. And so with Planetscale, my hope is that there could be, dozens of cool ideas of things to track, maybe even third-party like API integrations and things like that. And so this just becomes this sort of open source free thing that anyone could just take and fork and make their own tracker thing that they want to do. So that's the idea. It's been in my head for a while. I've owned the domain for a few years, and so I just sort of decided this was the project worth pursuing.
Comment in the chat, by the way, that the stream is not readable. Homie Coder says the screencast is bad resolution.
Is my
What
resolution bad?
what I'm seeing coming, well, I don't know. Like what I'm seeing in my viewer in the dashboard is a little fuzzy. Now it just got a lot better. I don't know if that was like a buffering thing or not.
I swapped my video quality. How's that, team?
Oh, okay. Yeah, there it is. Yeah. Huh. So
Clear?
how did you choose that? Like what setting? Where did you change that setting? Oh, like inside of Restream?
In Restream.
Oh,
Video
okay, cool.
resolution.
Yep. Yeah, I think it looks good now. Cool.
Sweet.
Awesome.
So this
Yeah, it
is
looks
my
a lot
idea.
better.
I have probably 4 or 5 major app ideas. I'm like, I would love to build this, but some of them I want to make money off of, so I can't just open source the whole thing. And this one I've always thought would be interesting to explore, see what people like, see what people don't like. And I already made a Twitter thread this week. I think you teased me about it, with your running code, getting code to run the first time or something was something James wanted to track. And people tend to always gravitate toward like nutrition and health. So that was interesting to see. So maybe that'll end up on this list. But the big goal will be how to create somewhat normalized UIs and normalized database patterns that can be extended, but not so different that I can't like put different things I'm tracking on the same page. That would be the end goals. I can just like go to the home page and see my life. My next oil changes in a week. My dog needs medication in 2 weeks. Like all these sort of things, there has to be some sort of normalization in the database. And so that's currently the problem that I'm trying to solve.
Yeah. Yeah, super cool. And it looks great, by the way. I love the not meme icon, the guy on the top left. I love that.
Yeah.
And then just looking at
That's
like,
meant to be fun.
yeah, just looking at the hosting section on the README. So you've got Netlify for hosting. You've got GitHub Actions, which I want to hear more about your experience there. You've got Planetscale as a MySQL compatible serverless database, Prisma as an ORM, styling with Tailwind, email and password authentication with cookie-based sessions. Is that something you built from scratch, by the way? Like, did you build the auth stuff in Remix from scratch?
From the indie stack, and so it's just very basic. Go to auth.server. I think it's auth server. Session server. So it's just session based. So what it does is it creates a session, and the key is the user's ID. And so we just use requests. And for those that don't understand Remix very well or have never heard of it, it's a lot like Next.js's server-side renders. And so pretty much everything important you want to have happen happens on the server side, and then it hydrates the client. It has some very basic hooks. So if we go to like the notes page, that won't be it, notes ID. So we can see this loader. We require the user ID. So this is sort of our way of getting the user. And then we get the note that matches the user and the node ID. So that ends up looking like this. So, and I do have a question for you, James, an interesting thing to explore today. The way that this works right now is, let's just go to the package file. So this one is doing a, Tailwind is our CSS tool of choice. Remix is doing this cross-m netlify dev command. So netlify dev allows us to run a local version of the netlify server code because it is being deployed differently than perhaps a traditional React application. So depending on where you're deploying your site, this you run Remix locally will slightly change, something to keep in mind. And then for now, I'm using this pscale connect command. And so I have a database with the same name as the repo. And so this just sort of connects you to the database, and then what it ends up doing is it gives you this local host port that you can then connect to. But it is slow. And that's the thing I want to ask you about, James. So like if I want to say do thing, if I hit save, we'll see that I do need loading states. It takes about 1.5 seconds to happen and to send a response back and to render the right place. When I'm working locally, I would want it to be as fast as possible. I don't think I actually want to reach out to Planetscale and deal with data in like this do thing is in the production database. I could branch it, but it would still be in, the Planetscale servers when it really doesn't need to be. And so my hope is that I can do like build a Docker Compose file and perhaps have a MySQL image running and, persistent storage on my machine that I can then connect Prisma to, and it be, the same as what's going to be in production. On how to go about doing that?
Yeah. So the short answer is you could just run MySQL locally. So there's only one big distinction between MySQL and Planetscale in terms of compatibility, and that's Planetscale doesn't support foreign key constraints, which is a very specific thing that most people assume means foreign keys. That's not the case. You can use foreign keys just like you would. So you could use MySQL that's installed on your machine. How you tie that into Docker, I've never used Docker, so I'm not 100% sure. But yes, you could do that, and you can embed it in Docker. But that wouldn't, like, when you actually deploy this thing somewhere, then you would connect back out to your Planetscale database. So you could just run completely locally during dev if you want to. The other thing, I don't know that this would have any effect, but you're running the pscale connect command, which then exposes that database at a certain port. So it basically sets up a local proxy. So you call localhost 8060 or whatever that port is, and then it forwards that on to Planetscale. One thing you could do is just use a direct connection string to Planetscale and just see if that proxy has anything to do with some of the slowness that you're seeing. So if you
Right.
just connect directly to Planetscale instead of that proxy, I'm curious if that gets any better. The last thing you could do is look inside of the Insights tab in your database in Planetscale to see how long the actual query is taking, and that would then give you an idea of like a little bit more of an idea of where the delay is. Is it the delay of actually getting the request to Planetscale? Is the request inside of Planetscale taking a while, which I kind of doubt it is, or
I
is it
can't
kind of the back
imagine
and
it.
forth
Yeah,
process? Yeah, I wouldn't
that
think
makes
so.
sense. I wouldn't think so either. Yeah, see,
So there's
that's
like,
quite a quick response time.
and what is someone saying it's a little laggy now, so I think that may just be a network thing. But yeah, if you're looking at like that, some of your recent writes or whatever, and you're looking at the total time in the handful of milliseconds or whatever.
So I'm sure I'll just run it off of Docker. The thing that offers me as well is in CI, I will have full integration tests for my features.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to inject data into the database typically. I call it seeding. So I'll seed
Yep.
data into my database, and then I'll run a Cypress test perhaps. And then, assert doing the way, the UI is doing what it's supposed to. And then I'll reset the database between every test. And so, of course, that would also be very expensive to try to do with Planetscale directly. And so either way, I'm going to end up Dockerizing things for the sake of CI, hopefully things for development. And it'll only take me, maybe half an hour to get all that connected and working correctly, because I've done it so many times before.
Yep.
So I'm always happy to publish that. I don't have an exact way of pushing all of this new information out, but if you guys want to follow that link to the repo yet, it already exists.
Oh yeah, go ahead and grab that link and throw it in the chat.
So it's here.
MDS is saying that my camera looks good, but it looks like your stuff might just be a little bit laggy. But I think that's just network. I'm kind of seeing it on my end too. So I don't know if there's anything we can do about it. Hopefully it's good enough for now.
I have high definition. My download's great. I don't know if my upload's great.
Yeah. You can never guarantee. I've done enough live things where there's always something.
Always something. But
Yeah,
so
throw
this
that,
is interesting.
throw that GitHub
see.
link in the chat for people.
I gotta get to our chat.
And one of the things we had talked about, which when you commented this on my last stream, I totally blanked that we'd already had this conversation. But the idea of like using Planetscale branches as part of your CI/CD process. So as you like create a new branch in code, to create an appropriate branch in Planetscale and then automatically create the deploy request to merge that into your main branch. That's something that ideally is totally doable. It's just a manual process now. Ideally, we have something like more packaged and formal put together to really tie into that DevOps pipeline and make a database a first class citizen there.
Yeah, it would be awesome. I mean, we've talked about it before, like you said, and I think my current hope is check my linters, check TypeScript, unit tests, Cypress tests, get everything to pass. Once that's happened, I'm actually intending, and I'm hoping to get some money out of this hackathon. It'd be really cool to win, right? You play to win. And so my hope is that this sort of full stack deploys. So when you make a PR, there's going to be a URL for Netlify. Cool. Love that part, right? Just, it automatically creates the whole thing. What I want, and I've talked to James about before this call today, is what I want to do is I want it so that the Planetscale database branches, and that branch is then pointed to the specific Netlify deploy that's happening for the PR. And so I'm hoping that I can stitch all these together, and I believe it's all possible. That's what I'm going to spend a lot of this month on, is getting this idea working. And so
Yep.
my hope right now is this little chart that you guys see here. The first box will be the thing that it's doing, and then the second box will be it will create the Planetscale branch based off the branch name, most likely. And the trick right now is to wait until that's populated and is fully initialized and available. So there'll be some sort of timer or sleeper or checker, maybe a while loop or something inside of one of these cards that's going to go, waiting for thing to be ready. And then once it is, we will set an environmental variable through Netlify CLI and push that to the PR. And so I'm going to find out through experimentation if all of that is supported by Netlify, because I know it's supported by Planetscale. I just have to say Planetscale DB branch, this thing. And so that's the hope. And then the bigger trick will be on merge on the main branch. I will take the branch and promote it to the release right through Planetscale. And so there'll be a separate GitHub action that will just be listening for branches to the main, or merging to the main branch, so that I can deploy the site. And then Netlify is probably gonna always beat Planetscale, I would think, because Netlify's build time is really fast. And so I was curious, James, if you have advice on if I should wait for Planetscale's. Do we have hooks available to us on the promotions when we promote branches to production?
Yeah, great question. So I'm gonna just bring us up so they can just see us talking for a few minutes. So
Sure.
no, we don't have that yet. Right now you'd have to be on some sort of polling cycle. So you create a branch and then you poll every 20 seconds or something to see if that branch has been completed. And for everybody else behind the scenes, what's going on there is actually more involved than maybe what you would expect. So a branch in Planetscale is its own complete database. Like, we track the relationship between it as a branch and another branch in what we consider a database, or what you see as a database. But a branch is its own database, which then comes with all these Docker containers and things behind the scenes that actually run Vitess. So that's why creating a branch takes seconds to a minute, maybe 2 minutes, to get that new branch. So right now, the only solution for that is to do a polling cycle, like you said. So no webhooks where they can kind of notify you when it's ready. That would be really cool. I don't know how it would tie in as much to a CI/CD process, because I don't know if you'd be able to register something that can listen for that update inside of your CI/CD process. So I think even with that, just now thinking about it, I would probably still do some sort of polling cycle. But that would be a really cool feature to have in the future, is just the ability to receive updates from Planetscale that X has been done, Y has been done, whatever it is.
Right. Well, and Remix offers client-side hydration. We talked about that a little bit. So I can load a HTML page, but Remix also offers API endpoints. And so what I would be doing is your Planetscale webhook would trigger my React function, and that React function would probably trigger the GitHub CLI and tell the GitHub CLI to start this process because the database is done. And so that would be my approach on a Remix app. So that I would just say, okay, go start the GitHub action of deploying the Netlify app because the Planetscale database is now provided. So that's kind of the hope.
Yeah, so I'm curious how would your Remix endpoint be available yet if the hosting in Netlify is not already done? That makes, or the deployment in Netlify is not already done.
Oh, so we will have deployed the product at least once already, and that GitHub webhook, API endpoint or whatever is going to already live before we have to redeploy the project.
Okay, so it would trigger, it would call a previous version of the endpoint.
Yes.
Which would then kick off a new build.
Yep, because I'm assuming if a webhook existed, it would have at least some sort of payload that tells me what, happened. And so the hope would be, okay, this branch got promoted to production and it's now complete.
Now I can go.
And so then I would use that payload to then trigger a GitHub action. That would be maybe the most hopeful scenario. And with polling and waiting, I just have to investigate GitHub Actions timeout requirements and what they allow and don't allow. And perhaps if it fails, just restart it and give it a retry and let that cycle start over.
Yeah, I know.
So it's an interesting problem to solve.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know Johannes at Planetscale has done exactly what we're talking about I think it's really just like bash scripts behind the scenes, but or like in the code, but same exact thing that you're talking about with the timeout. So at least for what he's done, I don't think he had any issues on timeout in terms of limitations inside of GitHub Actions. So hopefully that would work just fine. But I guess that would definitely be something to confirm how much time you have to finish the thing that you're working on. We have a question from Matt in the chat about
that's a good question.
Devrel question, if it's relevant. So one, just reminder, this is meant to be like office hours for people. If you're participating in the hackathon, make sure to ask those questions. But this is totally fine too. So Devrel question, if it's relevant, all good. Trying to figure out how Devrel teams structure their workflows. Does your team have a team? Does your team have a retro? How is strategy transformed into executables? How are external requests handled? I think a lot of this stuff is probably not super formal. So one, do we have a retro? We specifically don't have a retro. We have a weekly check-in where it's like a Devrel weekly or whatever. We just kind of check in with each other, see what we're working on, see what upcoming events and efforts and initiatives and things we have, and then go based on that. When I was at Auth0, we actually had a Slack reminder that would ask, and I'm assuming they still do, ask every Friday for people to reflect. How was your week? What did you accomplish? And what didn't go so well type thing. Another thing that I've heard people do a lot is like everyone go around and share a win in a weekly meeting or stand up or whatever, share a win and something that didn't go so well. Like always want to make sure to go out of your way to have reflections on things that didn't go so well. How a strategy transformed into executables. This this is something I think that I've struggled with, and I think Devrel has struggled with in general. Metrics are hard in Devrel. I like to think about like, what are we trying to improve, right? So if our thing that we're trying to improve is number of people that are using the platform, instead of maybe you have a number of like, I want to get 1,000 new signups for the platform this month, or like whatever that goal is, that's completely arbitrary. I like to then backtrack from that and like have that as a thing that you can work towards and that you can reference, but that's not necessarily the most important part of what you actually do. The more important part is like, what things can we do that we think will influence that and is valuable for the community? So if I want to get more people to sign up, can I do a workshop for people? Those are people that are going to get value out of a workshop and they're going to sign up for Planetscale in the process. Creating content, right? If I create a tutorial that's useful for people and it goes on YouTube, those people, if they follow along, they're going to get value out of the project or out of the tutorial, and then they're going to use Planetscale. So I like to backtrack. Like if we want to target 1,000 people signing up this month, we backtrack from there to say, all right, to get there, I want to have once a week live streams. I want to create one video a week on YouTube, and I want to create one article a week on the blog. And those are the things that I know, regardless of what the metrics end up showing, I know those things are valuable for the community. So I'm at least going to have a win in that regard. And then hopefully those add up to my expectations of like leading to whatever that arbitrary number is, because you just can't guarantee how many people sign up for your platform. So you just do what you think are the right things along the way. And external requests, this again, like I think it's a pretty fluid thing. I think the bigger you get, the more established you are, the more opinionated you can be as a team as like what's important. I get a lot of messages on Twitter and things of people, hey, I'd like to show you this. Would you want to do a joint live stream, etc. And it's kind of hard to gauge that. I think this is like regardless of Devrel, but it all comes down to priorities and potential impact and value for the community. And so if you only have the ability to do 3 streams in a week with partners, which one of those is going to be the most valuable for the community, aligned with like who is your target audience and what do we want to talk about or get exposure to. So always, I think having like those North Stars of like, here's what we're really trying to drive. Do these things, do these efforts line up with the stuff that we're trying to improve on? That's the number one thing to consider. The other thing is you just don't have, I never have as much time to do as many as many of the things as I want to. So you have to start prioritizing and not accepting every opportunity that comes your way.
Yeah, and with such a public project, right? Like you want developers to use your product, that's your business. How often are you balancing I need new customers. I need to bring in new people. I need some shiny object kind of thing to like get people excited to come into it versus perhaps like I want to keep existing customers. Um, I'm sure there's a balance there. Can you speak to that balance maybe of how you guys sort of keep both of those things in mind at the same time?
Yeah, I think like the easy answer is like the more people they hear about Planetscale, the better, with yourself betting on the fact that they're going to have a good experience. But assuming they don't, what you want to be able to do is support them in some way. And this doesn't necessarily scale at like large quantities, but the more I could have a one-on-one DM with someone, or maybe it's a one-on-one call, or just with some sort of signifier to them that I actually care about what their problem is, the better off that relationship's going to be. And like I've always been one of those people where I hate asking questions in forums because I would rather have someone that I know that I trust to give me an answer. And that again doesn't necessarily scale, but that sort of relationship is so much more valuable than like, hey, ask in a forum. And I have to do that too. Like I point people to my Discord, I point people to forums because you just can't answer everyone individually. But having those relationships with someone that you know at least is going to go out of their way to care about what your problem is or what your question is goes a long, long way. And the other aspect of that is like actually taking that feedback from people and doing something about it. So one of the really cool things about being at a small company is I've gotten feedback from people. I've passed it on to product or design or whatever teams. And then like the next day they were like, okay, this is fixed. Can you please let them know? And it's like that sort of thing, I think, is a wow factor for people that are using a platform to not only have someone that's like listening and paying attention to what your feedback is, but also then implementing that into the product. So that's been, I think those are like some of those significant moments of showing that you actually care about their process, their feedback, and taking that into account when we do updates.
Absolutely. No, that's really interesting. And you've been doing this a while. I mean, this isn't your first time doing Devrel. And so it's cool to see how you're able to, I'm sure you're providing a lot of value to your team. How big is the Devrel team at Planetscale?
It's me and Taylor.
Okay. I figured
So
it was a
Taylor,
small group. Yeah.
yeah, yep. Yep, just Taylor and I. So we have like our head of community is Yana. We have our manager of developer education is Holly, and then Brian just joined her team, mainly doing docs and articles and stuff, but other forms of content as well. So we all work really closely together, but specifically with like developer advocate title is Taylor and I.
Yeah, that's great.
Cool. There's a question. This is a really, really good one from Homie Coder. Can you explain what part of foreign key or foreign relationship / keys Planetscale doesn't support? So the foreign key idea in general is you have like a book table and you have an author table. And if people already know this, excuse me, but I'll just start from the beginning. But the book table is written by an author, right? So each of these has a primary key. It's ID, unique identifier for each one. And then if you want to associate this book with a given author, you can say this book, the author ID is the primary key of the author. So that's a foreign key relationship. You could do it the other way, and you can actually do both because this could be a many to many scenario, but we won't go that far yet. So an author could have a relationship to their books by referencing foreign keys. So those foreign key relationships are kind of exactly what you'd expect. The thing that isn't supported is foreign key constraints. And so typically a good example that I use for this is like if you have this book and author relationship, if you try to delete a book record, there's some sort of reference from the author to the book and vice versa, or with like a many to many table, there's some sort of relationship between this book that we want to delete and the author that wrote it, or the multiple authors that wrote it, if there's multiple on a book. So the constraints piece is like, what do you do in that scenario? Because if you delete this book, then your authors are potentially referencing a book that no longer exists. So you have orphan children or records or whatever. And so you can handle that in a lot of different ways. You could have the database say, no, you can't do this until you delete the other thing that this one is dependent upon. You could also have it cascade. So like if I delete this and this thing is referencing it, or these 10 things are referencing it, delete its relationships, those things that are referencing it as well. And there's I think a few other options. So anyway, you can have that logic be kind of built into the database, where the database will take care of that for you through these foreign key constraints. That is specifically what Planetscale does not support. And I couldn't tell you exactly why, I couldn't tell you exactly behind the scenes why, but the output of that was an intentional decision that then enables more functionality inside of a test, the underlying technology to Planetscale. And that was a trade-off that the creators of a test thought was like, we should definitely make this trade-off. The other aspect of this, if you use something like Planetscale, and I'm assuming other ORMs as well, you can Prisma. You can configure something like Prisma to take care of those foreign key constraints for you. So you can tell Prisma, hey, whatever like those different options are, you do this one. And so if I tell Prisma I want to delete a record, Prisma may then go out and delete those relationship records, whatever we call them, and take care of that for us. So for that, like, we kind of think there's ways around this that are reasonable. You can build this build this logic into your application. You could use something like Prisma and configure it to do it for you. So it's not that big of a missing feature or functionality. And again, it was an intentional decision based on the benefits that came from not having it. Hopefully that helps answer that question. Let me know if any of that wasn't clear.
I think about my boss chose MongoDB for the job I work at, and so we do NoSQL. And so how do you explain how, because to me the foreign key thing is like, oh yeah, that's just like a NoSQL pattern. It's like you're not going to have the proper sort of data integrity because it's so loosely coupled in a NoSQL sort of structure. So I've done my sort of the underlying technology of Planetscale. From what I can tell, it's not true NoSQL, but it's not actually MySQL either. It's sort of this clusterized version of MySQL. Is that the best way to describe it?
With the exception of like it is MySQL, and so there's no like NoSQL implications in here. It is specifically SQL. It is specifically MySQL. The layer on top of it, Vitesse, is what enables the scale, the sharding. And so, like, if you think about doing relationships between one record to another and doing joins and things, if those tables are now distributed on different machines or different shards of your entire database, Vitesse is the layer that says when we want to join these two tables, Vitesse is the layer that knows where to find those tables on the different shards of the database at scale. So it's still SQL, it's still MySQL. There's no NoSQL implications there. Right. It's just about Vitesse being that kind of like middle orchestration and scaling layer that sits on top of regular MySQL and translates things into that sharded environment and other things that come along with it.
Got it. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it might be useful to bring this up in this kind of general time together. For those that aren't used to Planetscale, but perhaps want to use Prisma and you want to bring Prisma along, the thing I learned from James recently was you basically abandon this idea of Prisma managing your migrations, and you allow Planetscale to manage migrations. And so in this project specifically, like when I am going to push new ideas and changes to the database, I'm just going to do like a Prisma push. And what that will do is Planetscale will see that a change request is basically is happening, and it will put the difference, between what it was there and what needs to be there now, and it makes a record of it, and it's stored in Planetscale's system to sort of track migrations over time. So that's just something interesting to keep in mind if you're doing the Prisma Planetscale thing.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So you still could do the Prisma migrations if you wanted to. We actually have a checkbox in the dashboard to keep the Prisma migrations table, whatever it's called. I'm not sure. So you can do that exactly like you had been doing. The downside with that is Prisma migrations use the Shadow DB thing, where that would basically be another branch inside of Planetscale, and you have a limited number of branches. So that's one of the reasons. But that and the fact that we have the deploy request process is why our docs and general recommendation is exactly what you're doing, where you just push your changes to your dev branch, for example, and then do a deploy request to merge that into your main branch of your database.
So I also have a question about indexing, which I think is similar to kind of the foreign key conversation. So in Prisma, when I define, I had just read sort of the docs yesterday about using Planetscale with Prisma, and they told me all my foreign keys I have to explicitly set an index if I want to index things aside from just the IDs. Is that something that when I put it in the Prisma schema file and I hit push, that Planetscale is going to generate all those indexes for me correctly? Is that something I don't have to deal with too much aside from explicitly asking for it to be indexed?
So after you defined that this should be an index in Prisma and you push that to Planetscale, is what you're saying?
Right.
Yep.
I
So
haven't
that
tested it.
should,
Yeah.
yeah. So that all Prisma does is translate all that stuff down into SQL. So it's just as if you told Planetscale in regular SQL that hey, I want this thing to be index. So yeah, as long as you're communicating in Prisma correctly, the assumption is that Prisma is then going to communicate to the database exactly what the equivalent of that is for the database through SQL.
Cool. The other sort of question I had about all this is when you make a branch and you experiment with your feature and you insert new data and you delete records and maybe you update records and you do things like that on the branch, what happens to that data when I deploy it to production?
So the data itself, not the schema specifically.
Right, the data itself.
Yeah. So right now, the when you do a deploy request, you're basically wanting to inject schema changes specifically, not the data that's in the table itself. And typically, you don't want to do that anyway. Like, there's rarely a scenario where you would want to take data from a development branch and merge the data itself into your production branch. So that would just be your schema. Now, when you create a branch, I forget where we are with this, but we're in some tier has early or beta access to this feature. When you create a branch, it's always copied over the schema, but not the data. And some tier has access to copy that data over as well. So if you start in one branch, want to not only copy the schema but the data as well, you could also copy the data over. But that's not fully. It's not a fully rolled out feature just yet. But
I know right now, right.
going back to the main branch, no data would go that way.
Right. Okay. Good to know. I hadn't experimented enough to find out for myself. I guess the other piece of that I'm curious, unless we have other questions coming in, is can we like export MySQL, a dump of MySQL? Can we like dump it, import it, a dump? Like kind of doing the most efficient way possible I could think of would be a direct raw dump of the database itself and then just import it. If I were to, let's say, I want a significant amount of data automatically imported without me having to run sort of like server script or something. Is that possible right now with Planetscale?
Yep. So you can take your dump. Sounds weird, but you can do that just like you expect. You can import that as well. We also have an imports feature, which I believe, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I think it may only import from Amazon RDS. But it's really, really cool because what it does like a live import. So you never have to shut down or stop interacting with your RDS database, but it's going to copy those things over while you're still working with it. After it's got it all copied over, it's going to continue to replicate. So like you can actually continue to use AWS, your RDS database. You can also then kind of know that everything is being replicated over to your new Planetscale database. And then you have this like switch moment where you can say, all right, I'm comfortable that that stuff is making it over. I want to actually test this on Planetscale. And now I can update my application to read from Planetscale. And at this point, the data is now being replicated back to RDS. So I've still got both. I'm working now directly with the Planetscale database and replicating that back to RDS. Then if all that goes well, all the testing is done, et cetera, now you can just cut the cord and work with Planetscale. So all that stuff is live with no downtime. So that's a really cool feature as well. But I'm not
That's
sure
very cool.
not
Yeah.
sure if that works with other databases that are not RDS. I'd have to check on that. These are great
Right.
questions, by the way.
Well, there's lots of ways to, there's lots of ways to inject data into your database. And it seems like Planetscale probably supports traditional ways.
Mhm.
But it's nice to know when you can like just take a snapshot of the database basically and like,
Yep.
I want to use this somewhere else, or I want to so when we dump, can we do something similar or you're saying that's a beta feature that some people have access to right now where you get a copy of the whole database on your branch?
That is,
something
yeah.
that,
So that's not completely rolled out yet when you create a branch and getting the data as well. By the way, I just
Cool.
looked at the docs for database imports. So this is for any external MySQL database. So it's not limited to RDS. That was just the demo that I had done before. But that database has to be internet accessible, which makes sense because Planetscale has to be able to access it. And then you have to be an admin because I think there's some sort of like you would have to enable something on that one for us to be able to go and talk to it. But
Right.
any MySQL database that you can get access to would work with imports as well.
The one thing I've wanted to do and I don't see possible yet is, and I don't know if anyone in chat has dealt with this, and maybe it's dangerous, but having Prisma use a different database, like perhaps NoSQL, like locally, where it's incredibly cheap, incredibly fast, incredibly easy to work with NoSQL. And then when you deploy, I guess you would have to change your Prisma schema definition to deploy it. Have you ever experimented with this idea, James, of like locally I have
Swapping.
a cheap, fast, like in-memory database, and then when I deploy, it's going to be Planetscale, this big architected solution?
No, not specifically. There could be some specifics of I'm not exactly sure what they would be. There could be some specifics that are different. For instance, when you work with
Right.
like your Prisma configuration file, like that has to change depending on what database you're working with. So you'd have to somehow keep like a local copy of that versus a deployed copy of that. And maybe you just pull all those properties from environment variables. So you could do that. I don't have a full answer to this, but I would challenge a little bit the idea of like running something that's faster / cheaper because like that's still going to depend on your use case, like data size, how many writes, how many reads, like all those things. All these databases, including Planetscale, have things that they're really good at. There are things that they're not as good at, and they have different use cases. So there's the potential that like the idea of something just being standard cheaper and faster may not necessarily be the case depending on exactly like what you're doing. Mostly, I would assume if you're doing dev work on your machine, like your data size is probably not that big. So it probably doesn't matter one way or another. But that's the thing that Prisma promises you, right? Like that's why, in addition to all the great features that it gives you for accessing your database, it then also gives you the ability to swap out your database for other stuff. So at the very least, you'd have to have like your configuration properties for Prisma in environment variables and have those be different locally versus what's in production.
Cool. No, and for those listening in, it's like, it's probably not a good idea to have your local database be a completely different technology than what you're deploying to. So that may be a no-no in general. I think what I would want the most is like a Vitis version of a SQL cluster on my local data, like locally running on my computer. That would maybe be the best case scenario. I've seen Planetscale has their own Docker image. Is that something that can just be ran as like a binary and just sort of doing the same thing mostly as what the actual like server's doing?
Yeah, so Vitesse itself is open source. This is definitely my perspective. I don't know, someone with more experience with that sort of stuff would say I wouldn't recommend doing that. Like the people who are using open source Vitesse, Planetscale is so nice because although Vitesse is incredibly powerful, it's a lot to manage and like get the things out of it that you're looking for. And so I wouldn't recommend running that yourself. You also probably like really over. I think if you're running locally, it doesn't make much sense to have like that amount of like Docker containers and things running. Like I think it would make more sense to just have a regular MySQL instance if you're running on your local machine versus actually running Vitesse. The other thing is like you're still if you're doing that against just the test that you're running yourself, you're still then going to miss out on any of the features that you would get inside of Planetscale. So you wouldn't have like insights to look at. You wouldn't be able to tie that stuff directly to branches, et cetera. Like all that stuff you'd get with whatever ones are connected to Planetscale. So I can't imagine myself personally a use case for actually running Vitesse locally unless you're like a really big business and you love Vitesse and it offers you a ton of power, but you're not ready to pay for Planetscale itself. I can't
Right.
really envision that making sense from a dev perspective.
Well, this week, fingers crossed, that Planetscale Docker image is something that you can compose and have Planetscale running on your computer, basically. My goal is in CI. I also want it to be cheap and fast and local. And so I would want to also do the same thing in CI where it'll just spin up a Planetscale Dockerized instance and do all of the CI. And so the Remix app that's running and the server are just all sitting in the same computer. And so everything runs really, really quickly. So that's the intention. We'll see how that goes. Perhaps I can come back on this Twitch channel
And
and
let
talk
us know,
about it
yeah.
later in the month or next month once this project's done. But yeah, it's an interesting problem to solve
Yeah.
because I realize that you guys are offering this P-Scale CLI and you're saying just run P-Scale Connect or just branch your database. We're going to give you a database URL to connect to. So just copy and paste that in your M file and just work off of a remote server. And for someone who's been using Docker for so long and local development for so long, like I kind of still want that. I still want a local database so that I have as fast of read and write times as possible without having to even think about the servers while I'm locally developing. That would be on my wish list of getting things working in a developer environment.
Yeah, that's so one in fairness to everything you're saying and my response, which I don't think fully addressed what you were saying. I know nothing about the Planetscale Docker image, so I have no idea what that means. Is it difficult? Is it take up a lot of resources on your machine? I have no idea to any of those answers. So yeah, um, couldn't quite actually answer that, but we could potentially follow up and I could ask internally, what are some of the use cases for people that have used it and how it's been for them.
Right. That'd be cool.
Homie Coder commented, I didn't even know I wanted this too. Something local, fast, and cheap, but with Planetscale, all net. I don't know what the net part means, but sounds like we may be onto something.
Well, and no credit to you guys. You guys have built an amazing product. No matter what, it will always be faster if it's on your computer.
Mhm.
Like if the database is running on your computer directly with no internet connection or anything like that, it will always be the fastest possible. There's no way. I don't see in the future. I've even
Mm,
experimented with like code. What is it? code spheres, like this idea of like virtualizing a developer environment, and then like using VS Code and like connecting to a virtual computer and then doing your workload off of it. Even those tools, even if they're faster computers, there's always this like latency between, and I'm a Vim guy, so take this with a grain
Yeah,
of
that
salt.
wouldn't make.
I want everything done fast and immediate, and I don't want
Yep.
to wait when I'm programming, because I'm going to be typing quicker than most, and I want, when I hit save, to see what happens, and I don't want wait times. And so I'm sort of selfish in that way, and I'm just sort of greedy with like, I want everything to be as fast as possible so that I don't have to wait, so I can get a feature done in like 10 minutes, right? Versus waiting a second and a half every time I do a write.
Yeah.
And so perhaps I'm an outlier here, and perhaps people don't care if things are slightly slower, but it's just something I tend to kind of get obsessive about.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's should always be the goal for developers in general. The one thing I'll caveat with, like, you could get into an instance where you're running locally and you've got such a big data set that your machine just doesn't have the CPU or whatever to like churn through a big query optimally. So there could be scenarios where like the time it takes to actually get your query to any database, but like Planetscale server in general, and its resources able to crank through that query faster and respond, like, could still be quicker just because of the processing time itself, including that delay of like actually getting to the server. Most likely not, but it would do it. Like, you could hit that scenario where it would be different, but especially for what
Yeah.
you're talking about, I definitely get your point.
Well, I mean, let's dive into that for a few minutes. So you guys all know we test our applications, but there's different types of tests. And so you would have a load balancing test, which would be like, what happens when, like, my all the things tracker, right? What happens when Planetscale has 20 million records of things that people have tracked? Or let's even go bigger. Let's say like 100 million records of things that have been tracked. Well, my initial thought right now is, well, I'm going to index everything off of the user ID. So when you log in, this isn't a social media app. It's going to be the things you're tracking. And so as a human, you're going to reach maybe the thousands, maybe the tens of thousands, depending on what kind of crazy things people want to track, individual records. And so even then, pretty much any database solution that you're offering, for my average user, they're only going to have so many records. And so I know for the most part, I don't have to do a crazy amount of load testing per user during local development. And even my data samples are going to be small, because I'm just going to kind of say, like, can I create this thing? And if I have like pagination or some sort of infinite loading kind of thing, like, just assert that like the first few pages work. And then what I could imagine is the SQL dumps we were talking about, like dumping an enormous amount of data onto on a Planetscale branch, and do some additional tests, which typically are done with a different mindset. And so I'm going to have a weekend or a day or whatever where I'm going to purposefully do load balance testing, already on the assumption that Planetscale is an awesome product and all the things you've promised are going to be delivered. So I'm not going to maybe spend an enormous amount of time asserting that large, humongous data sets even perform well. I'll probably just keep track of the insights tab, and hopefully one day, if like this all the thing tracker does well, we get a lot of users, we get a lot of data, and then we have more interesting problems to solve, with people that are smarter than me, right? I got to bring in contractors or consultants or someone, or the Planetscale team directly might help me. And so what I think of when I do hackathons is like, let's be cheap, let's be fast, let's just do things with as little amount of information as needed, sort of minimum viable data, so that I can just ship the features and assume that they work. And then everywhere there's like large data sets that are going to impact performance, I do plan on having a few caching layers. For those that don't know, Remix offers just the browser caching as a solution, for in most cases. So you just tell the browser to cache it. So I would think most things are going to be extremely cheap and fast and minimal. But of course, every project's different. So you're going to have different sort of problems with big data that do have to be solved with or without Planetscale. It is something you have to spend time with.
Rats. I muted because I lowered my desk. Definitely agree. You probably, like with the use case I was talking about, you probably don't hit when you're testing locally. Like when you're doing load testing, you want to be load testing on an actual deployed infrastructure so you can actually see what the load impact is regardless. So yeah, you probably don't hit that limitation, but there just is like it could be. But your testing stuff locally is most likely not near as much as what your actual production application is. And even at that, like you've got lots of time for you as an individual app creator and any other startup or app creator, like you've got plenty of time to figure out what scale means for you, right? Like as right now,
Yeah.
scale for you is 100 records, right? And okay, then you get 100 users, now you got 1,000 records. So super scale at that point is like 10,000 records. And then you're like, all right, what if I had 1,000,000 records? So you build up that tolerance and that attention to scale as you actually are scaling. Like you do what you can to accommodate for that as you go and early on, but most of it you just don't actually figure out until you actually get to that scale.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you end up caching is its own problem, and you don't have to solve it at the beginning. And most caching solutions available to you are cheap and built into the browser now. So you just kind of lean on those as long as you can. But it's a good problem to have once you're big enough. That's you want to be big enough,
Yep.
right, to have to deal with those problems. And some of my day job stuff has dealt with that in the past. But for those that don't know me, I'm sure most of the people here don't know me. Like my background is front end development. I did that for about 10 years, and I've been a full stack developer for probably 3 or 4 years. So not even half been a developer have I been in the
Doing back end,
database
yeah.
and doing server side things and like holding those responsibilities. It has come naturally to me because I've been programming for so long. It was like, oh, here's a different set of responsibilities. And I know some people argue front end is harder than back end, and I might agree. Which is awesome why like you guys at Planetscale offer me a serverless scalable database, with a CLI. There's nothing clear or creative that I have to do on my part. And I have used Kubernetes before, and it's a lot more work. It's an enormous amount of work to do horizontal and vertical scaling on your own in a platform like AWS. Like it's just so much effort and work is involved that I don't care to do. It's not interesting work to me. So grateful for
Yep.
for you guys and similar companies that are creating products that I just plug it in, and it's a very generous, free plan, and so I can sort of scale all the way to the point where I start to get serious with the project.
Yep. Love it.
So maybe you could.
I'm
go ahead.
gonna. I was gonna say I was gonna pause just to make sure. One, I'm gonna wrap up, and so I can get back to some regular work stuff. Two, if anybody has any last questions before we go, make sure to throw those in the chat. And three, what were you gonna say?
Oh, I could dive into whole new topics, so I'm gonna hold my questions. But I do want to. Can we do like a shout out? Is there some place that people can share their projects, or does Planetscale have a Discord or some place where we can talk more about this stuff?
Yeah. So for right now, specifically with this hackathon, there is a channel inside of the Hashnode Discord that
Awesome.
if you like to ask more questions about, like specifically in the context of the hackathon, you can join there. If you have questions about Planetscale, you can tag us on Twitter, you can tag me, etc. But especially for the hackathon for this month, just want to make sure if people have any roadblocks or things that they're struggling with, that we help get those out of the way so people can build cool stuff.
And I'll be there too. Another Discord to join.
Yeah, I know,
I'm
right?
a part
Yeah.
of so many. But yeah, I'll join the
Never
Hashnode one
ends. Yeah.
if anyone wants to chat to me. I know you and me are both very active on Twitter, so that would be another great place to reach out if you just want to keep the discussion open.
Yeah, agreed. Well, thanks for coming on, by the way. Totally put you on the
Sure
spot,
thing.
and you nailed it
This
for
is fun.
joining
Yeah.
in the middle. Yeah. Thanks everyone else. This has been a great session. Especially your questions really helped spark the conversation. I think Homie Coder was appreciative of that as well. So yeah, good stuff. I'm going to be back. I'm actually going to be with Brittany Postma from Netlify tomorrow talking about deploying Remix to Netlify. So hopefully you'll have time to sit in and watch at least, and you can probably give us advice because I have never done it before. And then I'll be back next Wednesday at the same time at 1:30 Central for another office hours for the hackathon. So yeah, a few different opportunities for people to hang out.
I'll if I'm around, I'll definitely join you.
Cool.
That's cool.
Homie Coder is asking where this is back on the same channel. So the stream tomorrow with Brittany will be on the same channel, on the Planetscale channel, and then the stream next week be on this as well. And then on Friday, I stream a live episode of my podcast on my personal Twitch channel. So James Hugh Quick on Twitch. Cool. Let's see. I wonder if do I have to be logged in as... I don't think I do. Let me try this really quickly. Can I do this? Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to do a raid in Twitch. Wow, so this thing really is just Theo. Wow. And I'm not logged I'm not logged in as Planetscale in twitch.tv, logged in as my personal channel, but I'm a moderator, so I have the ability to raid. So I'm going to raid everybody over to Theo, who's also a fan of Planetscale, I believe. So I'm going to raid everybody over there. Thank you all for joining, and I'll catch you later.